Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube, and also Josh Richens here at Weiss Advice. Little bonus video here for the week. You guys have been following the channel, so Josh is probably not a new face to you anymore, but I thought it would be cool to do a more formal introduction, to get to know who Josh is and why Josh is, right? What's happening, Josh?
Not much, Matt.
Right on. So I want to give people just a general frame of what you do professionally so that there's a little bit of context. Primarily, you are a producer, but you do a myriad of things, correct?
Yeah. I also play a lot of drums, mostly, and so I do a bit of gigging here and there, and a little bit of session work on the drums and songwriting a lot as well with people.
I see a bunch of guitars and basses in the background as well.
Yes, I do have a little bit of an obsession with electric gear.
Gotcha. Do you play guitar, bass, piano, anything else besides drums?
All of it. I played a lot of different instruments. My parents all had like lots of instruments around when I was really young. So I think I started with piano. I actually, for like 4 years, played trombone while I was in school too.
Nice.
And then, yeah, after that, I ended up picking up guitar and bass guitar as well. I actually I quit playing guitar 4 different times because I just couldn't wrap my head around it, and my brother already played guitar. So,
Oh my God. Listen, let me make a quick confession here. I love that you're on the channel because I'm a terrible musician. I have tried to play everything on earth. I can squeak by on keys and I can squeak by on bass. My sister, on the other hand, is one of those savant people. She decided that she wanted to do a summer abroad in college in China. So that semester she taught herself Chinese. Like, so she was playing trumpet, violin, she built a guitar and then played it. And meanwhile, there's me over there with like a ukulele going, yeah, it's not in tune, you know.
yeah. No, I also had a very musical family, which was really, really cool. So yeah, I think I mostly got each of them there. Drums as well was pretty early on too. My dad always had a drum kit around and he played, so he always liked to show us stuff. So that's one that stuck with me the most, I think.
But your dad, professionally speaking, is an electrician or specializes in electronics, correct?
Professionally speaking, he's retired nowadays, the lucky old man. But no, he's a very, very, very smart electrician. And I know I'm a little kid, just like my dad's the best, but he's an incredibly smart man, a very well accomplished electrician.
There's something about having the influence of people who are in the sciences or STEM where I feel like it kind of veers you into the world of looking at music from a more um, intellectual is not the right way of saying it, but like analytic kind of way. For me, it was composition first, actually.
Yeah, that's actually really funny. I actually connected with my dad a lot over quantum mechanics because I got really into it from like YouTube channels and all of the like wave equations and wave functions and stuff like that. I was like, wait a second, I kind of get waves. I get this stuff. And my dad had actually done a whole bunch of work around things related to quantum mechanics in the past. And so that was really cool. And I agree, it definitely affected the way that I think about music and especially think about how waves interact with each other.
Oh, right on. I mean, that is effectively what we are doing, right? We are sort of scientists of sound, but also scientists of sound, but also
Sounds like
artists at the same time. And as producers and engineers, our job is to kind of marry those two concepts. So when you first started out on your musical journey, you were pretty young. When did you start seeing it as a profession?
One of the biggest turning points was actually that I played basketball when I was about 16, and I was playing in not great teams or anything, but like the higher kind of like rated local teams. And when so I was playing in what's called Div 1 and also playing, but I was kind of the worst players, and then also playing in it was called A grade, but Div 2, depending on who you are. And I got into a band that was touring and playing a lot of weekend shows. And I realized that music was more important because I didn't want to be taking up space on a basketball team where other people were really dedicated to that. And actually, I was more dedicated to things like music. And so I stepped back from basketball to focus on music. And I think that's where I realized that it was for me. Well, not that I always knew that I wanted to do music before that, but I think that's when I realized that that was my focus. And that's what I really wanted to do.
It's funny. I feel like sometimes there's a bit of advantage to this. I don't think that everybody can necessarily relate, but sometimes when we're achieving in one area and realizing that we actually love something else, it can be very self-validating. For me, I got into college not for anything music related. I received a very large scholarship because of my writing, and I wanted to be a horror writer, and that was my focus until I realized that it wasn't as compelling to me as the little electives I was doing on the side in the electronic music lab. And I just wanted to always be in there. I'd have projects undone, but I'd keep going in there because it was more fun to work on that. And I'd complete the project. I was already done all the work for that, but I was just doing more of it. And so it just started to all kind of come into focus to be like, wait a minute, maybe this is what I really want.
Man, that's so interesting to hear that you were doing writing. Maybe that's why you have such a narrative style to the way that you mix.
I think it is. I think that's why I put things in those kinds of terms. I always have to see a story in the song because to me, I just love stories. I love good stories. When we were talking before the interview, you mentioned Love, Death, and Robots. I love that show. I think that show is so good. You mentioned that actually you found a lot of inspiration. Could you tell me that story about that moment?
Yeah, I actually can. So I had a really cool moment where I can't remember what it was. I think I was watching a Zach Grooves video, a drumming YouTuber, and he interviewed somebody and asked them for their advice for just like amateur drummers, and their advice was message your heroes. I just thought that was really, really interesting. And to relate this to the Love, Death, and Robots thing, I had watched this episode of Love, Death, and Robots, and I was just absolutely blown away by the score. I thought that...
Do you remember the episode?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that now. It's the one on on Io, the moon of Jupiter, the Jupiter moon. It's like Into the Heart of the Beast or something like that. I could be wrong. That might be a different episode. But it's from the latest series. It's from season 3. And there's a lady who crashes. There's 2 ladies who crash their spaceship, and one of them dies, and the other one has to drag the other one's body across this moon around Jupiter.
Yes.
Yeah. And I just thought that the score was so like well done. And it was done by somebody called Robert B. Cans. And I had just heard this advice about message your heroes. He kind of became an immediate hero. And I messaged him just kind of saying like, hey man, I'm astounded. Like that's really, really cool work. And that's kind of like the way I took it. I didn't necessarily want anything from Rob. I just thought it was really, really cool. And I had heard that. And I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to message the guy and tell him that's amazing. And I did that. And we ended up getting talking a little bit. And I asked him for some advice about how he got to creating such a high level of work. And he shared a really, really interesting quote with me. Let me see if I can find it for you, because I think it'll be really useful for others.
Wow.
So he shared a quote from interestingly enough an author called Ira Glass. Mm-hmm. And it goes like this. Nobody tells this to people who are beginners, and I really wish somebody had told this to me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste, but it's like there is this gap. For the first couple of years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good. It's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. A lot of people never get past that phase. They quit. Everybody I know who does interesting creative work, they went through years where they had really good taste and they could tell that what they were making wasn't as good as what they wanted it to be. They knew it felt short. They knew it fell short. Everybody goes through that. And if you're just starting out, or if you're still in this phase, you've got to know it's normal. And the most important thing you can do is a lot of work. Do a huge volume of work, put yourself on a deadline so that every week or month, you know, you're going to finish one story, or for us, song, you know, whatever. It is only by going through a volume of work that you're going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions. I took longer to figure out how to do this than anyone I've ever met. It takes a while. It's going to take a while. It's normal to take a while. You just have to fight your way through that. And it's a very emotional quote for me.
That's a great quote. It's unbelievably true.
Yeah, and even if you're not new, I think it phrases this for people who are brand new. But even if you've been working at this for a long time, and you're in the middle of that of doing all of that work, which is where I think I was when I.
The middle is the hardest part. Oh, 5 years in is terrible.
Yeah, that's where I think I was when I was reading this, and it just said, all the pain is worth it. The moment that you give up, the pain isn't worth it anymore, because you didn't do it for anything. But stick with it, because it goes somewhere, and it's all worth it in the long run.
So let me make this about me.
Your channel, after all.
You know, I've never heard it phrased so eloquently, but there is a certain truth to that. When you start out, you have all of your fresh ideas and none of the execution. When you're a musician who first starts mixing, you make some of the best mixes you'll make for years, because all you can tune into is the music. You don't have the technical skill to get to the upper echelon, but you've got the musical skill to get you up there. Then you start trying to fill in the gaps with the technical skill, and that's when everything starts going downhill. Right? That's when things get terrible. And then you start climbing back up again, and you start letting go of what you think you're supposed to be doing. And you just go off of now the experience that you've had, and you find those original fresh ideas and that love for it that you started with again. And that gets you all the way up the mountain. So when I was putting together Weiss advice, remember, I'm making this about me. What I said to myself is I don't want to be the person who is trying to sell somebody the idea that you don't need time and hard work. You just need these tips and tricks. Because I see that in everything, not just in music production. I see that all over the place with the ClickFunnels and all that kind of bullshit. And none of it's true. And so my goal when I was sculpting out curriculum and things like that was, how can I accelerate this process for people? How can I get people through that valley where they really start to recognize their own shortcomings, and they start to lose that initial love for things that propelled them into it to begin with, and make that as quick and painless as possible, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's like an interesting point to that is I worked at a guitar shop for a while. And when I started working there, I worked with this guy who was incredible at guitar. He was like amazing. He could play any solo. He was this like heavy metal shredder that could just play anything you threw at him. And all he did every night after work was he went home, he drank a beer or two, and he played guitar solos. And I saw that, and it clicked. It was silly. I was about 21 or 22 at the time, and it clicked. And I was like, oh, if I practice, I get better. And it felt really like obvious, but it just like seeing it like that was just like, just go and do the thing I want to do. Like, I don't have to get caught up in the emotions behind it, because I know I want to do it. It's just about doing it, you know?
Yes. There are certain things that are challenging about that. One of the toughest ones is that we find ourselves working toward perfection, especially when we're newer. You know, the first couple of years, 3 years in, we try and work on one single thing to make it perfect. And really, the better idea is actually, once it's complete, even if it's not that good, just let it go and move on to the next idea. Because once you get to a certain point, the diminishing returns kick in, and it's better just to be starting fresh and starting new and doing it again and reapproaching it. You know, people think that you'll run out of ideas. And that's not true. That's not the way the brain works at all. It's people think the same way about memory, right? You think if I start to try to memorize too much stuff, I'm going to run out of room in my memory. But it's actually not like that at all. The more you try to remember and the more you start to remember, the more capable you become of remembering more things. So by storing more memories, you get more memory capacity. It's counterintuitive. It's the same thing with ideas. The more you start to get ideas out, the more you start to get that practice out, the more you start to experiment, the more room you have for ideas and experimentation. Just counterintuitive, but really important, I think, for people to know. Um, right. We were talking about your life. I've got some questions about drums I'd like to ask you.
Hmm.
One of the things that I really wanted when bringing somebody onto this channel, and I want to bring more people on eventually as well, but y'all are hard to find. It was somebody who can offer information that I can't necessarily offer. And so the fact that you are a multi-instrumentalist and a producer, and also very importantly, a drummer specifically, gives you insights into things that I don't necessarily do. So as far as drumming goes, what style of drumming do you feel that you specialize in? And also, just as a little side question, do you consider yourself a melodic drummer, or do you think that that's a BS concept?
A melodic drummer. I haven't heard it put to me that way. Let me answer the start of the question before I get ahead of myself. So you asked about what genre I play, and I came from, like I said, when I was 16, I joined that band playing drums, and that was like a hardcore band. So I came from the, double kicks, lots of, halftime beats and stuff like that, hardcore type music. But in recent years, I find myself playing just tons of funk. I can't stop myself. It was Wolfpack. Wolfpack got me into funk, and I just became obsessed with it. And it was really funny. I started listening to Wolfpack, and then all of a sudden, Jackson 5 songs would pop up, and I'd be like, wait a second, what's going on here? Like the songs that I just never liked before. So yeah, I found myself playing tons and tons of funk. I'm actually kind of doubling back and doing some more heavier projects these days. So it lives around that rock area. I mix in some of that funkier stuff, but one of my biggest influences is actually Brody Simpson. He's another Australian drummer and producer, I think in Queensland, who just does these incredible hip hop drums that are all live recorded, but it almost feels like somebody's placed every sample of it and gotten all these different sounds from everywhere. And his sound design is just incredible. And it's very distorted. It's very hip hop driven. And so I like that stuff. I'm not as good as him. I can't do it as well, but I like trying to figure it out.
Well, it's almost an entirely different skill, right? Doing your sound design with your drums versus even doing it in live context. There's a drummer named Zach Danziger who is he's almost like an EDM drummer sometimes. And he will do things with oh, what are those stupid bowls called where you swirl the thing and it makes noises? Ooh, you know what I'm
Those are
talking
the ones
about?
you're talking about.
Yeah, so you can put those on your drum and you get this it almost sounds like your drum got pitched up and stuff like that. Like there's all sorts of really interesting ways of doing sound design with your drums. Melodic drummer is something that kind of gets thrown around in the jazz world a little bit. So there's a guy named Han Benink, who is a German drummer, and he just gets he's very, it's not notes, because it's not like he's tuning to get pitches outside of maybe the toms or something like that, but just finding ways to express through different placements of dynamics and where along the drum he's hitting, because you can get so many different tones and textures just by changing little things like that, how he hits with the stick, and always doing that in a way where he's kind of composing, but composing through sound as opposed to focusing primarily on beat, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. I get what you're saying now. I have seen interesting stuff where drummers. I saw this crazy thing once where this girl was changing the length of her rim click to play a melody. Crazy stuff. So you can do stuff like that, and for sure there's I think a spectrum to that kind of stuff. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily melodic the way that but I think what it speaks to is how you think about your drums and how that plays into the way that how that defines how you end up playing them. And for me, like I love improvising, and so when I'm thinking about it, everything is vocabulary. If I'm saying something on my drum kit, it's a phrase that's trying to tell somebody something, and and I want that vocabulary, just like if I'm speaking normally, to just be in my hands, so that I'm not thinking about the words that I'm saying when it comes out. And I think that dictates a lot of how my drumming comes out. It's very flowy sometimes. And so I think maybe there is some overlap in the melodic concept, but I think personally, I think in terms of rhythm a lot more than melody, and I find rhythm a lot easier. And so I don't know if I'd call myself a melodic drummer.
Do you ever do the speaking thing? Have you ever seen the drummers do this? I actually recorded a drummer once where it showed up in the overheads too, where they're with their mouth, they're going, and they're making the sounds while they're playing it out. I love that.
Yes, yeah, I do it. I do it 100%, and it's helpful. It's actually useful as a drummer. You can, like, in a drummer, you might know the groove for what you want to play in your head, and that's what that's about. It's about like feeling that groove before you've tried to like get it out through your hands. Because if you're like, your hands just fall into that like that groove. So it is actually really useful. But one of my favorite videos on my Instagram, it's like this, it's very compressed and very like over the top, but just right before the drums start playing, there's this little as I go into it.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's important because in order to get a great performance, great performance comes from not having inhibition. And when I talk to people about how to produce vocalists in particular, because vocals are such an unbelievably intimate instrument, that inhibition has to be completely out the window and people have to be completely comfortable. So doing things like that in the studio or even live is really, really helpful and normal. And while it might sound weird and it might feel embarrassing, actually, it's really important to just feel comfortable doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree. For some of my recent vocal sessions, even the one with Harry, actually, what I've done is I've set a loop up for the entire song, and I've hit record, and I've left the room for 3 takes, and then I'll come back, and then we'll look at those 3 takes, and we might work on, well, look, here's something here. Let's go for this energy, and then I'll be in the room working with them after that. But I think it gives you a really authentic first 3 takes where your artist isn't worried and they're not feeling the pressure from you in the room with them, and it kind of clears the cobwebs out. So yeah, I 100% agree.
That's right. There's a reason why that people sing best in the car and in the shower. It's because they believe they're alone and can't be heard by anyone else. So, we want to recreate that as much as possible. A quick question. If you want a really fat snare sound, do you think it's better to get your tuning between your batter head and your resonant head to be as accurate and tight as possible and to the spec of what the manufacturer recommends? Or do you think that you actually get better results when you distune the resonant head?
Before you started, I was going to say detuning the resonant head.
Okay.
And then you brought it up. So yeah, I tend to just go low until it feels good. And the other thing to think about that is how tight your snare wires are. So looser snare wires are going to let the resonant head move a lot more than tighter snare wires. And so you get a lot of fatness and thickness out of loose snare wires.
Listen, drums are my favorite thing to record. And I've literally never even thought about that. And it's so obvious. I don't know if you caught my facial expression, but it was just like I just got socked in the jaw. I was like, duh. That's awesome.
Yeah. No, if I'm doing heavy stuff, they're like just kind of touching it because it just kind of sits in the background as a bunch of air, and that snare drum just feels huge.
Do you think being a drummer really informs your ability to produce other instruments and maybe even mix?
Yeah, it does. I think as when we're working with so many different elements, it's good to know about each of those so that they can inform each other. And so in that regard, then yeah, my drum sounds and how I get that stuff will inform what space is left over for my bass sounds and where I place that in. But maybe the genre and what I'm thinking about my bass sounds might define where I go with my drum sounds. Yeah, to a certain degree, but I think that it's more about, like, you have to know a little bit of everything to know how they're all playing together.
I agree. I think I think even if you're not necessarily a musician, even if you're not working in genres that are even require more than like just specifically being very good at samples and programming, I think picking up an instrument, even if not to get good at it, but just to understand how it works. I've picked up almost every instrument in the world at this point. Like literally things that you would not like. People are like, "Really? You tried playing mountain dulcimer?" Yes, I did, because I want to know where the sound comes from. I want to know the mechanism. I want to be able to speak the language, and I want to understand the music. So I think it's worth picking up, even if not with the intention of getting good. Uh, and I got one more question for you. If
Hmm?
you were to define your style as a producer, this is a tough question to answer. How would you do it?
A really tough question to answer, because I think one of my places where I fall short is not being intentional enough with my niche.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I'm going to answer it a little atypically, maybe, and I'd say my style is hard headed.
Okay.
Uh, I I I'm stubborn, and even if I don't know what I'm doing, I'll fight at it until I get somewhere where I'm like, this works, let's run with it. Um, yeah, I don't think my style sits in too many places. I try to be really diverse, but I try to be stubborn with my sounds. I try to go for what I've got in my head, and I don't stop. You know, I I try not to stop until I get there. You know.
Right on. That's funny. I'm actually very much not the same way. I usually I try to put everybody else way in front of me. And so my production style is to play with the recording process in a way where it becomes as smooth, so there isn't butting, trying to like hold on to one idea. It's just if an idea doesn't feel like it's working, move past it, find a different way of doing it. Try to dodge the difficult moments and just make it as easy for people as possible so that they can perform at their best. And I think that there's merits to both, because I think if you have something that you're really strong about in your mind and you go, this is what needs to happen, I just don't know how I'm going to get there yet, but I'm going to keep digging at it and cracking at it until I do. That is a mentality that will get you the results that you want. And it really just depends on how hands-on you are. I mean, you play a lot of the instruments, you do a lot of the sound design. I don't. I usually watch the other players. I hire the players. I know whose style is going to fit for a certain thing, and then I try to make sure that they're performing at their best. And that's really where I think I shine, but it's very different. What was the
Mm.
first thing you said about your niche? You said
I
something very interesting to me.
Yeah, I don't think I've been intentional with my niche over the years. I started off making heavy music, and then I started kind of almost like, if I look back, it's almost like I got bored and tried to start making pop music and left some of that stuff behind, when I probably could have um, focused on it a little bit more, because I did already have a really solid foundation in that in that area. But it's something that I've thought about a lot as to whether it is that big a detriment. Uh, it's like the jack of all trades, master of none kind of idea. But I realized as well uh, that being a generalist is a skill in its own right. Having like knowing a little about a lot is a skill that not a lot of people have, and can really help you about and can really help you in a lot of scenarios. So, on one hand, I'm happy that I didn't niche as hard, and on one hand, I kind of feel like in some areas I could have.
Do you know how that full expression goes?
Mm-hmm.
A jack of all trades. Do you know how the full expression?
Oh, it's not. It's yeah, it is different, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
It completely changes the meaning of the phrase. The full phrase is a jack of all trades is a master of none. You remembered it now. A jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one.
Yes.
I think as a producer, it's very important to have a very diverse range. I think that even if you only produce within a certain genre, you still should be versed in other genres anyway.
Hmm.
And I think people don't necessarily take advantage of that. Anyway, I think now is probably a good time to wrap up because I feel like we could probably talk for eternity. Like there's so many questions I feel like I could be asking you, and we could have a lot of like really interesting things come up. But I think this is probably a good place to kind of turn it over to the comment section. And
Yeah.
I think anything in terms of production, engineering, drumming, really probably recording. You've done a lot of your own mastering because let's be honest, sometimes we have to. You know what I mean? And like even other instruments. I think that all of those questions would be great for Josh in the comment section below. Not going to do the plugs for any of my stuff this video here, but I do want to wrap up. Josh, you want to say anything before
No,
we go?
I just want to say thank you for having me on the channel. It's been a wild ride so far. I've had tons of fun making the educational content, and yeah, this interview was tons of fun. Thank you so much.
Right on. All right, guys. We're going to cut off there. If you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification so you get notified. And of course, you know what we say here on the channel. We are musicians. Sound is our instrument. I will catch you next time.